What is up, everybody? Welcome back into the In Arturas We Trust podcast. We are here on the eve of the regular season for the Chicago Bulls, and I have a super special guest with me today. This is Chip at MV Paw, Bulls Dynasty on Twitter. You guys know, great work, great writer. Thank you for joining me today. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Can't complain. Thanks for having me, Ross.
Of course.
Ready to talk Bulls.
Yeah, man. I mean, it is time to get excited for the regular season finally. We are here. We've been waiting. We've been talking about it. We've been covering preseason, and we are super close as we come to you on this Sunday night with the Bulls playing against the Pistons on Wednesday night to open the regular season. So just a little bit of house cleaning before we get to some of our season predictions and what we think might be happening. Real quick, make sure to hit subscribe if you're new here. If you guys are listening on Apple or Spotify, make sure to rate and review the podcast. Those help us out a ton. And if you're watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys, as always, for doing that. So here in the last couple of days, we've been looking at what the final roster will look like for the Bulls. On my last video, actually, we talked about Stanley Johnson potentially not making the roster. We found out he did not. The Bulls waived him, and they gave Matt Thomas, it looks like, the final roster spot, with Tyler Cook getting that final two-way slot. Chip, any surprises there for you? Did you expect Stanley to stick around, maybe?
I think Javonte kind of played Stanley off the team in a sense, right? Because if you can play Javonte and you got Pat and you have Derek Jones Jr. all playing that kind of power forward role, I'm not sure Stanley's as necessary. I think Matt Thomas is really cool because he's kind of different in the sense where having Stanley is a lot more depth in a spot we definitely use with, the power forward spot, of course. But Matt Thomas, his ability to kind of, repeat his form and shoot off movement is kind of something we don't necessarily have outside of maybe, Zach or Kobe. And I think it gives us something a little more dynamic. So I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
And I that was kind of my thought process too, especially with Kobe being out, add a little more shooting, add a little more versatility, a little more ball handling. Which is great. It kind of sucks for Stanley Johnson. We wanted the Johnson and Johnson pairing with him and Alizé. Sadly was not meant to be. With Stanley, I kind of saw the writing on the wall a little bit, especially after that close game in Cleveland where it felt like we really needed everything, from our bench, and he just didn't show up. It was a little unfortunate. So Matt Thomas is here for the time being. We'll see what ends up happening when Kobe is recovered from his injury. It sounds like we're still about a month away from even contact. So that's a little concerning. The timeline originally was November, so that's still accurate, but it's looking like late November rather than early November. But it's a long season, so hopefully that is working out okay for Kobe. The two-way slots. So like you said, Devon Dotson, we already know. And then Tyler Cook is going to get that second two-way slot. I know there were a couple players that maybe some Bulls fans were taking a look at outside of who was already on the roster. Do you want to speak to that a little bit of who might have been an option for those last two-way slots?
Oh, God. I mean, I'm a big draft guy, so, I'm looking at all the deep second-round guys and everything and the players who are bouncing around. I'll keep it short and sweet. That I'm personally a big Mason Jellins fan. I know I told you about him once or twice. He went undrafted out of Arkansas last year. He basically graduated high school. He was 270 pounds, which is a 6'5" point guard. Probably isn't ideal. He dropped all the weight playing junior college, went to Arkansas, was great, went to the NBA, just ridiculously good at drawing fouls. I think he's a really funny player because, when you think of like slightly overweight, maybe point guard initiators, like James Harden's a big guy. And he basically, when he's done interviews, he just says he watched James Harden tape. And, he literally just thinks he's James Harden. And I think it's, really endearing for a two-way guy to try and play like James Harden. But, I mean, the dude gets to the foul line. He's a good passer. I would have loved to see him. Currently doesn't have a team. Maybe he'll figure it out.
We'll see. I mean, there'll be options as we get into the season. We'll see what ends up happening with, like we said, Matt Thomas when Kobe White comes back from his injury. There's still that trade exception from the Daniel Tice sign-in trade that hasn't been used yet. So possibly maybe make a move there for that last roster spot. It's a luxury now that we get to look at this roster and say oh, well, we could go anywhere with this 15th roster spot. It actually matters. It's not just a throwaway guy who's never going to play. We're talking about a team that has the depth and the talent that you look at the 15th roster spot and you could actually get something important there. from that position. So it's a nice change of pace a little bit for the Bulls to actually be caring about some of these guys. And I think, you look at like Marko Simonovic, Ayo Dosunmu, who are rookies this season. These young guys, like there's a plan here that goes beyond just this season of, bringing in Lonzo, bringing in DeMar, trading for Vooch, and wanting to win now. But there's also a plan to develop young talent and hopefully create a winning program for the future going forward. So it is nice to not just be like, I don't know, trading second rounders for cash anymore.
Yeah. Selling our picks. Right. So those two-way slots I think are important. And I think that might be something Bulls fans need to train their brain a little bit to get used to. Cause yes, other teams, when they sign players to two-way contracts or, they bring in training camp bodies, like those dudes end up sometimes developing into rotational players. I don't think that's happened in Chicago since Jimmy almost, like a guy who is like coming in at the bottom of the roster and, develops into a role player. So that's a little soapbox that I want to try to spread to Bulls fans is like, these matter. Like Devon Dotson, he could become a player. Who knows? Same thing. Tyler Cook, I didn't see a whole lot from him in the preseason, but when you get a chance to play with the Windy City Bulls, obviously if I don't want to put it out there in the universe, but knock on wood, injuries, anything like that. It's nice to have guys who have experience and have been playing and are conditioned and ready to go. So that's where we're at with the rest of the roster. No surprises really. Everything is kind of what we expected. Alize Johnson was able to make a name for himself and stick, which I was really excited about. I know I didn't really prepare you for this, but Alize Johnson, just real quick, what have you liked from him so far in the preseason? Yeah, I mean, I've been a big Alize guy from his time back in Brooklyn. I always loved getting to watch him and Chris Chio's a 5'11" point guard play. But I think Alize did a great job. I mean, he's always been a big effort guy, and he didn't get a ton of playing time, but when he did, he always made a good impression in it. And his kind of when you extrapolate the numbers, because going playing 5-10 minutes here or there, he always put up like massive per 36 numbers where he's averaging like 15 and 15. And I mean, he did have 2 20-point games, including a 20-point, 20 rebound game last year. So, I mean, the dude's going to produce when you put him on, and that's the kind of guy you want on the bench.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I was really pleased that the stuff that we were scouting and we were looking at from his time with Brooklyn and Indiana before that, he's doing it. Like he is the quintessential high energy spark plug guy off the bench. And I think he has some underrated abilities as a passer, and a little bit in transition to just bringing the ball up court. I think he, like you said, brings a lot of energy, little bit of vision, offensively still pretty raw, but you know what you're getting from him as a rebounder. And I made a joke on Twitter that like, I think he should have the worm badge in 2K, because the way he's able to navigate, getting boxed out and stuff like that. So a dude who I'm really pleased to see is living up and potentially outdoing some of the expectations that we had for him. So Alize Johnson was impressive. We know what we saw from Javonte Green in preseason. And I think, having Patrick Williams and Tony Bradley back now into the rotation, it just makes Javonte Green that much more valuable. The minutes and Alize Johnson, same thing. The minutes that they're out there, they're going to have to make the most of them. Billy Donovan has been preaching competition this offseason, and I think you see that with those guys. Like, they are competing at all times for more minutes, and nothing is promised, nothing is given for younger guys like that. So I think it's a lot of fun to see them playing so hard because they know every minute counts so much. So that's a little bit of preseason recap, things that we liked, things that we saw. It is time. We can start talking about it, the regular season. And we'll just start with what we're most looking forward to in general this season. And Chip, I'll start with you. What are you most looking forward to this season?
Yeah, I think for me, it's got to be Patrick Williams. I know a lot of people are talking about how, he's going to get less shots now that the team's got a lot more, talent in the starting lineup, and I kind of get that. But I do think in the same kind of terms, especially early last season, we had a couple games where we went up by a lot early on. And, in the fourth quarter, both teams are kind of, garbage time running their bench, and Patrick was able to run the offense. And I think that this season, with how good the team is, there's going to be a lot of games where we're playing teams that aren't playoff contenders and we're blowing them out. And maybe the entire fourth quarter, Patrick Williams gets to go run the offense. And I think those reps are going to be really exciting to watch. And in the same idea, same vein, not losing to bad teams. just not blowing leads that you shouldn't and not getting yourself in bad situations.
Yeah. Those are both great points. And I think Patrick Williams could be a huge part of the second half of your statement of not losing those games that you already have a lead in. Because, yeah, I mean, you are going to be going pretty heavy with your starters in the first half. If you're already, establishing that lead, you come into the second half with some of your bench guys. You let Patrick Williams run the offense maybe a little bit. And hopefully you would think we will have better results this season with a team that has more depth and appears just on all cylinders to perform better together from what we've seen in the preseason. And my answer was pretty similar. I'm excited to see Patrick Williams, but a little bit of a different focus for me. I want to see him really take that next step into becoming our defensive anchor. I think we've talked about it a lot. We've talked about the potential that's there for him to be one of the best perimeter defenders in the league, if you want to say it. I mean, the dude has the physical skills to do it. And I think the basketball IQ as well. I think Alex Caruso is like such a key to unlocking that for Patrick. Learning how to communicate better with his teammates, calling out assignments, being more vocal and more involved in general, more aggressive. I think those are things that he's going to pick up on pretty quickly from a guy like Alex Caruso, and just having that championship experience that Caruso has is super valuable. But what I'm looking for from Patrick is I really want to see him take over that role of being the defensive anchor, of being that guy night in, night out that you rely on to make sure that everyone is in their positions, and make sure that, if Vucevic is not covering the lane, he needs to get over and maybe protect the rim a little bit. Those are things that we actually saw in that last preseason game, was running Vuce a little bit at the 5. So there are just so many different things, so many different options for Billy Donovan and ways to use Patrick Williams. Offensively, of course, but defensively, we know what he's good at already. And I just want to see him, just solidify those things that we know he can already do. And that's what I'm looking forward to this season. Obviously, Lonzo and DeMar and Zach, those are the obvious ones. We are all looking forward to that. But there's, little things in the margins that can make this team so much better. And I think Patrick Williams is the obvious choice of a guy who, if he takes, even just an average step between rookie and sophomore seasons, that'll be huge. Okay, I know this one was a little tough. Once again, I'll start with you. Chip, what's your biggest surprise or hot take going into the season?
Yeah, I have a lot of hot takes. I'm not the hottest take guy on the Bulls. I think I'm kind of closer to consensus on them than some other teams, but I do have a Bulls one. I think one thing I've noticed is in the preseason, Derek Jones Jr., he's come back from injury. He didn't have the best game. Tony Bradley, same case. The last game, he didn't necessarily have a game where he jumped off the screen, especially compared to guys like Javante and Alizé with great preseasons. So I think in general, people are low on them, but I think this season we're going to get a lot of Derek Jones Jr. minutes, kind of maybe regardless of how he plays in a sense. I know he's a bit younger and not necessarily in a developmental way, but when you're running Vucevic and he's playing his pretty high drop coverage where he's oftentimes meeting players in the pick and roll at the level of the screen even, it leaves a lot of empty space in the paint. A lot of bigs get behind him, and I think in order to work around that, well, you want someone who's athletic and can protect the rim as a forward behind him that can kind of cover that baseline spot for him. And I think Derek Jones Jr., that's part of the reason he's brought in, is because he's if you're looking for a vertical athlete, I mean, his 7-foot wingspan and 45-inch vertical are going to get him to the 7-foot wingspan, going to get him to the rim. So, I mean, I think he'll get a lot of minutes, even though maybe people aren't necessarily the highest on him after preseason.
For sure. Yeah. And that's the thing I keep going back to is it's such a long season. There's so much time for guys to get in the groove of things or to establish themselves as part of the rotation. Let me ask you a quick question, though. So between Derek Jones Jr. and Troy Brown Jr., who would you take off the bench first if you're Billy Donovan?
Currently, I think I would go for, between those two, probably Derek Jones Jr. I've been trying to work out the rotation in my head, and I think ideally you don't want Troy and Alex Caruso on the court at the same time. I think the job they both want to do defensively kind of clashes, and I think you don't necessarily want that. And I think Derek Jones Jr. coming in, I mean, I think he complements guys like Vooch well who are going to be out there. So I think, the first sub, if you're leaving Vooch out there in the starting lineup, I think Derek's a great combo to bring with him.
Cool. That's interesting. Yeah, the reason I even ask you, I noticed that, and this is, obviously in the absence of Patrick Williams and Tony Bradley, But I noticed in the first 3 preseason games, Billy was taking Troy Brown Jr. off the bench and using him almost as a replacement for DeRozan, at least offensively, from what I could tell. Having him drive, having him kick it out, playing more on ball than we've seen, in his short time with the Bulls, obviously. And then giving him some opportunities to get those wide open corner threes, which we already know he's good at knocking down. I thought that was interesting. And kind of to your point, Derrick Jones Jr. is recovering from an injury still. It's one of those things that we'll see as we go into the regular season, what kind of minutes he gets. But, I'm a big Troy Brown Jr. guy. I'm super high on him. But I think you're right. Derrick Jones Jr. Should see some heavy minutes this season. So my biggest surprise or hot take, and I actually was just mulling over this today. I was doing the Bulls on Tap podcast with those guys who are amazing. They do fantastic work. But we were talking about all-stars on the team. And so the question came up, how many all-stars do you think the Bulls have first? And who do you think will make it? And so everyone was kind of saying the same thing, Zach and Vooch, which Zach and Vooch makes sense. And I agree with, because of the front court depth in the East in general, is just kind of like, it's kind of wide open for a guy like Vooch to come in there and wake up every morning with his double and waltz right into the all-star game. My thought process was a little bit different. And I almost went kind of the narrative route of like, Vooch was on a crappy Orlando team. He stood out because of that. He was their best player. I think now he's going to fly a little bit under the radar. And that's not to say I don't think his stats will be good. I think he'll continue to be very good, and build upon what he did last season. I just think that he'll be overlooked a little bit by the national media. And because there's this guy that we signed this offseason who has a rabid, insane fan base that probably doesn't even care about basketball at the end of the day. They just love the guy for being the guy. Talking, of course, about
Tony Bradley.
Yeah, Tony Bradley, exactly.
People love him. They go crazy.
Global fan base. They will follow him to no end.
People are saying he's the best UNC guy since Jordan.
Exactly. So that's why you bring him in on a bargain contract.
Absolutely.
But looking at Lonzo Ball, the fan base that he has, we know how the fan vote is a part of all-star voting. And we also know that being in a market like Chicago instantly boosts your visibility, your marketability, just all of these different factors that I feel like could help Lonzo make his first All-Star game. And it's not going to take necessarily a crazy performance from him in the first half of the season to get that done. I think as long as he is an above average to good point guard, which I'm sure he will be as far as I'm concerned, I think he has a very good shot to make it just because of that rabid fan base. The renewed interest in the Bulls in general could help him. DeRozan is an option, but I think Lonzo is kind of a flashy pick, and that's a very popular flashy pick for the younger generation. Which, you who was it that they voted into the All-Star game a couple seasons ago? It was like a total meme, but it ended up working. The name is escaping me. I feel like it was in the West.
I know there was. I know Zaza Pachulia was very.
It might have been. Yeah, it might have been Pachulia. That might be who I'm thinking of. But that just goes to show you the power that the fan vote has. For one, but two, I think there will be legitimate interest in Lonzo Ball making the All-Star game, just because the Bulls will be a better team, and he'll be a big part of that. So with that said, talking about the improvements this team has made, talking about some of the expectations for this season, I'll just ask you, where do you think the Bulls will finish in the East this season?
So I have the Bulls finishing fourth right now. I think it's pretty varied. I think obviously a lot is going to depend on injury because there's so many teams at the top, and a lot of them it's like one injury just puts them well below the other ones. I think part of it, again, it's hard to say with the Ben Simmons situation. That kind of changes things for people because if he's playing, or if they get someone of an equal quality playing in return for a trade, that makes it a lot harder. I have him fourth. My top three, I have the Bucks, the Nets, and the Hawks. I'm a big guy on all three of those teams. I think for me, I know the Bucks and the Nets are the kind of obvious one. I feel like everyone kind of has that take. For me with the Hawks, I think they're just the deepest team in the NBA, like 1 through 10. I think that when we talk about Billy Donovan, Arturas, let's talk about bringing in more ball handlers and making yourself offensively kind of dynamic because of that. You've got Bogdanovic, you have Herter, you have Young, you have Cam Reddish off the bench. John Collins can do some of that. I think there's a lot of they're just super deep. They're coming off a good year. I think they're going to be phenomenal this year, especially in the regular season.
That's the highest I've heard someone go with the Hawks. I'm actually surprised. I
have a friend who has the Hawks as the 1 seed.
Really? high on like a Trae Young MVP kind of season or something?
Sort of, but also just like the way the Hawks are built. I think because I come from draft Twitter, so it's more of a draft consensus, and I think everyone's kind of enamored with the way the Hawks are ran, and they draft. So
yeah, that's super cool. It's cool to hear it from that perspective too. I obviously dabble a little bit in draft coverage during the draft, but not throughout the rest of the season. So it is really cool to hear that perspective on it. So I do want to qualify mine a little bit. I have them as third, and that's third in terms of best case scenario, because I do feel like on paper, I look at the rest of the Eastern Conference and I really don't see that many teams that are better on paper, top to bottom, than the Bulls. And I think the Hawks are a team, like you were saying, the depth is there. And I think they have a perfectly valid argument. The Bucks and the Nets, obviously clear and above the Bulls. I think that's a fair argument. And then I look at the rest of the East and it's like, okay, the Sixers, like you said, Ben Simmons, that situation hasn't been resolved yet. And I also think even if he isn't going anywhere, they're not coming back as a team that feels really great about where they're headed and what their future looks like. And unfortunately, that's just kind of part of the game. So, I mean, even if none of the drama happened with Ben Simmons at the end of the playoffs, they still had a very disappointing exit. And I'm just not super scared by them necessarily. And
Did you watch the preseason games?
Right.
Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine.
Did you watch the Philly preseason games? I think I'm pretty. One of the things that scares me on Philly is watching the preseason games. What is Doc Rivers doing, man? They ran 35 Andre Drummond dribble handoffs a game, man. If they're gonna run 30 Andre Drummond dribble handoffs, man, they might not make the playoffs.
Yeah, and we can divert here for a second, because I am so with you about Doc Rivers as a head coach in general in the league in 2020 and 2021. Like that decision kind of baffled me. But then how he's handled the Ben Simmons situation with zero tact and zero grace. That team is coming to a head at some point. They're going to have to blow it up most likely. And Embiid is the guy you want to build around, but like when you've sat here for so long, not trading Ben Simmons, it's like, well, you're kind of, I don't know. It feels like they missed the boat a little bit on that one. So all that said, Sixers don't scare me a whole ton. And then I look at the rest of the East and it's like the Heat, I feel like on paper, once again, the starting five, I see it. And then the rest of the roster, I don't. I think that they're going to have trouble with spacing. They're going to have trouble with their age, keeping up the conditioning for a whole season. Another thing I love that Billy Donovan has been preaching this preseason is conditioning. Teams that run, make it far. We've seen that the last few seasons in the NBA. And like you said, Chip, with playmaking, ball handling, having so many different playmakers and ball handlers, you see the cream of the crop, the top teams in the league, they do those things. They play defense, they pass the ball. And those are things the Bulls have invested in this offseason. So then I look at the Celtics, and we'll just hop to the next question that I had here. And the next question was going to be, who will miss the playoffs? And I had Celtics, and it looks like you have Celtics too. And I'll let you make your argument here in a second. But for me, I just don't think they got better. I guess, Dennis Schroeder on a cheap contract is an improvement over paying Kemba Walker the outrageous amount that they were paying him. But that's financially. I don't think him as a player is moving the needle a ton. I do think that there was a little bit of memeing that was going on with him in the offseason because he turned down that Lakers contract. I don't think he's as bad of a player as some people have been making him out to be. He was recovering from COVID too during the playoffs, which I feel like kind of gets overlooked sometimes. But other than that, I mean, they lost Fournier. They traded for Al Horford again, which is, okay. I just overall, I don't see anything that really has made that team a whole lot better. I know that they struggled with injuries last season and COVID, but we did too. Every team did. And I don't really see a team that is going to be a finals contender, frankly, is kind of where my mind is at. And if you're not a finals contender, the East is already so deep, as we were just talking about with like the Hawks, the Heat. We haven't even gotten into the Knicks yet. There are just so many teams. There will be an odd man out, and the Celtics to me just look like the most likely of that crew. What's your thought process on that?
Yeah, so I think first off, the one thing that's really bothered me that I'm trying to get off my chest here a little bit is the like 10, I think it was like 10 or 15 games that Vucevic and Levine played together, and how the team's like rating wasn't super good. Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum have played like 250 games together, and they've yet to have a year where they were like played better when they were both on the court. Like they play worse when they're both on the court. And another concern I have with Boston, which is kind of my biggest one, is usually when you're building a team, you get your stars and you surround them with floor spacing. And when you look at the Boston roster, the only players who attempted more than 2 shots a game and shot more than 38% from 3 are Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, and Peyton Pritchard. And I think usually you're trying to surround your stars with spacing. I feel like the Celtics have surrounded their stars with some offensive traffic cones and like Josh Richardson. And I don't mean to hate on a specific person, I guess, but I'm not loving the idea of why isn't Enes Kanter there, because that's not conducive to winning basketball games. So that scares me a little bit. And then I think it's just when I look at the roster, it's hard to build lineups that are like really great offensively, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of scary, especially in the Eastern Conference. And I think I'm scared about the fact that their stars have a track record of playing worse when they're both in the court. There's a lot of weird things with the spacing. It's a new coach. And there's a lot of things that make me hesitant to love the Celtics this year.
Yeah. No, and that's a great point that we hadn't mentioned yet. The new coach, technically a new front office. I know Brad Stevens still with the team, but like you revamped a little bit, and it's always an adjustment period when you do that. I've also always kind of been skeptical of the Celtics front office in general. And I'm still kind of feeling it out. Once again, the Schroeder thing worked out in their favor, but not necessarily because of some shrewd, business tactics. It just kind of fell into their lap. It was another offseason for the Celtics where like they were supposedly in on a lot of these big name free agents and they whiffed on all of them. And that just kind of seems like par for the course for the Celtics the last few seasons. So we'll see what the plan is moving forward with that franchise and what the vision is. I still have it in the back of my head that at some point Brad Stevens is going to come back to coaching. I just feel like he's so young. Like it's just so crazy for him to just be like, yeah, I've had a good coaching career. I'm ready to hang it up and be an executive. Like he looks like he's just out of college. The dude is so young. We'll see with the Celtics, but those are the teams that we thought probably could be the odd man out. And especially with the way the play-in tournament is structured now, it could be anyone. But for a team to lose in the play-in tournament, the Celtics are, a good candidate for that. Yeah. So moving right along here, this is opening it up to the rest of the league now instead of just the East. MVP votes. So obviously way too early to say who's going to be MVP, but we do like to do this and then look back on it at the end of the season. So Chip, who is your way too early MVP candidate?
My way too early MVP candidate is going to be James Harden. I know there's been a bit of flack recently with the new foul rules, and he was struggling with that a bit this preseason. But, long term, I think he's always been someone who adapts and kind of figures out a situation and makes the most of it. I think, he'll get over that. And I think for me, especially like we have no idea if Kyrie's going to play basketball this year. If Kyrie's not playing, James is really like the guy who's going to run the. Obviously there's Kevin Durant. But when you talk about KD, he's going to get his points and he's going to do his thing, and he's unbelievably one of the most skilled players in NBA history. But when you look at like regular season stats, especially in Houston, when James Harden, it was like you have to go out there and run the offense for 35 minutes a game and like just do your thing, man. He puts up really good numbers. The team's going to be really good this season. I think people are a little lower on him because of his playoffs last year where he was playing hurt. I think the Nets are going to do well, and he's going to put up great numbers, and I think that's going to be enough to kind of spur him on.
Yeah, I see that. I see that for sure, especially like you said, if Kyrie doesn't play. And James Harden could average a triple-double. We've seen him do insane things like that when he's playing on ball. So, yeah, if Kyrie's not out there, he'll be probably the guy with the ball in his hands most of the time. So I definitely could see it. I, for one, went with Luka Doncic. My thought process on that is just kind of like, it feels like it's time. With stars in the NBA, like I go back to when I was, younger watching Derrick Rose. Like that was watching the D Rose MVP season is when I first started to really understand and pay attention to award voting. Cause that was the first time it actually mattered to me. So going through the MVPs of, ever since then, it always felt like it was a guy whose time it was. Like I know that there was the year where Harden had an amazing season and everyone felt like he was snubbed. Well, he ended up getting it the next season. It was his time. Same thing with Westbrook. The triple doubles. I don't believe he got MVP the first season he averaged a triple double. I thought it was the second season. Either way, he was doing crazy things and it felt like it was finally time. I feel like this is going to be Luka's time finally. And a little bit of voter fatigue. I feel like going Giannis, going James Harden, going even LeBron, if he has a good season, it just feels kind of like we've been here, done this. We've been doing this for a decade. It's time to pass the torch to the next generation. And I feel like this will be the perfect time to do it with Luka. I also think the dude's just going to have a crazy season. We've seen what the Mavericks have been doing in the preseason. And I also think that there's going to be a certain aspect of like, I don't know, off the court with everything that went on with the Mavericks this offseason. Obviously Luka got his contract, but I don't know. I feel like there's something to prove there a little bit with the way that people have talked about the Mavericks. Have kind of doubted the front office moves. Obviously, I'm not a huge fan of their coach. I don't think many people are. And so I feel like Luka has a lot to prove this season. Now, that doesn't mean I think that the Mavs are going to win it all or anything. But I do think that he's going to kind of put the team on his shoulders and get it done because the kid is crazy. Okay, so once again, way too early. But let's move on to Defensive Player of the Year. Chip, who you got?
I have Rudy Gobert. It's a really indie pick. I think people don't really see it coming. They think of Rudy Gobert and they think of the dunking and the pick and roll rim pressure, and they don't necessarily think about the defense maybe. But I think this guy's pretty good defensively. I would even go as far as to say he's maybe great defensively. It's a boring pick, obviously, but I mean, he's the best defender in the NBA, in my opinion, and he's going to win the award again because I think the award voters don't really watch a lot of basketball, and I think grading defense requires you to watch a lot of basketball, and I think they don't want to do that, and they're not going to do that, so they're just going to make the safe pick and pick the same guy again.
Yeah, that actually all sounds right to me. I appreciate you going with a dark horse candidate here. It would be really boring to hear some guy who's like won it before or something. Same here. I'm going with the guy who won it before. I'm going with Giannis. Just once again, voter fatigue. I feel like they might not give it to Rudy 2 years. Or well, would this be his third year in a row? I forgot who won it last season, but
I believe this would be his fourth.
Oh Jesus! It goes to show you when you bring up like indie picks, there really are none. And I was kind of doing the same thing, trying to go a little bit out of the box here, and there's really nowhere to go with it. I mean, I guess you could go for a guy like Ben Simmons if you're feeling like really, really adventurous. But I just think, Rudy's a very safe pick. Giannis is a very safe pick. Two guys who will always be some of the best defenders in the league. Just easy picks. So here's one that's open to a little bit more interpretation. Most improved player. I feel like we could go a bunch of different directions with this. Who did you end up landing on?
So I ended up choosing Kristaps Porzingis, who I've been touting around that it's 8,000 to 1 odds for him to win a Most Improved Player. I think this is a good bet. I put money on it.
Yeah,
I love it. So my thing with Kristaps, I think the public perception on him has dropped a lot lower, and I think than it should be. I think like last year. Here's my thing with Most Improved Player. Sometimes the player genuinely just improves, but with Kristaps, he doesn't really need to improve to like have a big jump in counting stats. He just needs to like be healthy and not be told to just stand in the corner.
Right.
Like if you actually run some offense through him and he's actually healthy, like he'll put up a lot of stats. I mean, towards the end of the 2020 season, was kind of the first time he had recovered from that knee injury with the Knicks, and before he got hurt later in the playoffs that year. The last 21 games, which I mean that's a quarter of a season, it's a pretty big sample size. He was averaging 27 points, 11 rebounds, and 2 blocks on 47, 37, 85 shooting splits, which is pretty good. And last year, I mean, he was averaging like around 20 and 8, something like that. I mean, if he jumps back up to like 26 and 10 or 26 and 11, I mean, that's a pretty big jump. And I think one thing that kind of was eye-opening for me when I was looking at Most Improved Player is the player that's on the most, or that wins Most Improved Player is almost always on like a playoff team. It's never like a player on like a not so good team. So I mean that kind of eliminates half the league for you. And I think right now the odds-on guy is Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I feel strongly confident that Sam Presti is going to do everything in his power to prevent that team from winning games.
Right.
So for me, I think the Mavericks are going to be pretty solid. I think they'll be a playoff team. I think Kristaps doesn't really need to be better. He just needs offense ran through him and to not get hurt.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a great point. Rarely do you see it with Most Improved, but like a dude who just needs to be himself again. We've already seen him be that player, just needs to be that player again. So I like that pick. I think that's an underrated pick. So for mine, I originally was going to go with OG Anunoby, who I think is a really, really good pick for Most Improved. A very popular, trendy pick right now. But I'm Arturas fan club. I'm a Bulls homer. You guys know how to do it. I'm going Zach LaVine. And the reason I'm going Zach LaVine here is because I think it's just more of a recognition thing. And less of a, oh my God, Zach LaVine is having an amazing season. He's never done this before. Like, I think Zach, as far as counting stats go, might have a little bit of a worse season compared to last season, getting used to these new teammates, potentially scoring less, having less of a burden offensively, which I do think will lead to him having more energy to exert defensively. And I know that defense isn't always a popular factor to incorporate into the MVP or the most improved or MVP conversations, any of these conversations, really. But I just think, like I said, Zach is finally going to get the recognition for what he's already been doing. And that alone will show people, holy shit, this guy is really, really good at basketball. Maybe we should have been talking about this before. So that's kind of my thought process on Zach winning it. But could be totally wrong. The spirit of the award should go to a guy, like I said, like OG Anunoby, who actually could be taking his game to the next level. But we'll see. I do like Shea. I like that idea. I just feel like you're right. The team probably won't be very good, but I do think that Shea will be, I'm high on him. I think he's going to have a good season. Okay. So 6th man of the year. I'll kick this one off real quick. Mostly because I don't know if he's going to be playing 6th man. It's Derrick Rose. I went with Derrick Rose, but like the dude's been playing so well in the preseason. I almost feel like you need to give him the option to start. Like the dude's been playing really, really well. I don't know. I'm going 6th man Derrick Rose once again because I feel like it's time. He's been playing the 6th man role for like 3 years now, and has been kind of in the conversation that entire time. The Knicks should once again be in the playoff race, and I just like what I've seen from him so far in the preseason. I think he's looked good. Chip, where are you at on this one?
I mean, I think it's a good idea. I'm pretty confident he'll come off the bench. I don't think Kemba takes a massive pay cut to come off the bench in New York. I think he'd be pretty upset if that happened.
Good point.
But I mean, I think Derrick Rose is a great selection. I think he's probably a super likely pick to make it. I mean, he's going to put up the counting stats. He has kind of the brand awareness. Everyone's super aware of him and knows how great he is playing in a big market. He's going to be on a good team. I mean, I think all the indicators point. I think it's a great choice. I tried to go a little more out of the box. I tried to make up for my Rudy Gobert Defensive Player of the Year call, and go a little more audacious on this one. So I mean, I personally have Markieff Morris in Miami winning 6th man of the year. So my thing is in Miami, when you look at the depth, I mean, there's a lot of, like you mentioned earlier, the depth's the concern there, and I think. When you look at the Heat, like when they were great, what they were doing defensively, one of the big things was like kind of building a wall in the paint when they had the racist Call of Duty dude and the Kelly Olynyk to be kind of big, and they'll shoot threes and they'll kind of help you wall off the paint. I think Markieff fits in that role perfectly, and I think one thing that is super interesting, I think Mark Schindler brought it up on Chuck and Darts podcast, so I kind of ripped this from him, but I think it's a good idea. The PJ Tucker, the last time that his team in the regular season was better when he was in the court was 2018, which is 3 years ago. I think his role with the Bucks is a little bit overblown this year. I don't think he was particularly great, and I'm pretty confident he's going to start in Miami just on like a politics thing where it's like PJ Tucker's not going to want to come off the bench. Yeah. And so I think you bring Markieff Morris off as the 6th man. I mean, we saw when Marcus Morris was in New York. I mean, that obviously, not the same person, but they're very similar players. He put up a lot of stats, a lot of points, a lot of rebounds. I think it's going to be really important for their defense to give Markieff a lot of minutes to help wall off the paint because, again, depth isn't the best. And I think he's going to put up a lot of counting stats. And I think, when push comes to shove and Miami's trying to win games, I think it's in their best interest to have him on the court. So I think he's getting a lot of minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great pick too. And I think what you said is by virtue of just needing him, will put him in a position to get a lot of minutes and potentially put up some stats. So yeah, I like that pick a lot. Okay, so here's a fun one that I feel like I went the easy pick, but I want to hear you. I'm really excited to hear your stance on this one because I love this dude. Rookie of the year. Go ahead.
My pick was Josh Giddey, the Australian guard for the Oklahoma City Thunder. Yeah. 6th pick in the draft. So my thing with Giddey is I think obviously like when he was in Australia and even in the preseason, he puts up a lot of numbers just across the board. I mean, he's like a 6'9" point guard, so he gets a lot of rebounds. He's a phenomenal passer. So he's getting a ton of assists. And I mean, he's able to get himself enough points to be in the double digits easy. I know that players like Cade are kind of the easier pick. Cade, Jalen Green, those are kind of the top of the line guys. Alperen Şengün's kind of a trendy pick. But I think for me with Giddey, I think one big thing that I'm kind of banking on with this one is, like I mentioned earlier with Shai, I think Shai is really good, just like you mentioned. I think he's pretty good at basketball. And I think that Sam Presti has a vested interest in his team not being good at basketball. And I think as a result, you maybe get some tank violator DNPs for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and that opens up a lot of shots and ball handling, and I think that's going to go on Josh Giddey, and I think he's going to get a lot of chances for that. I mean, if you're taller than 6'7" and you can adequately run the pick and roll, you're pretty much offensively unstoppable. It's just not something that's easy to defend.
Yeah.
And he's 6'9" and runs the pick and roll exceptionally well.
Yeah, he looks like a natural. Giddey, I am excited about too. And I have some friends who are Thunder fans, and yeah, I'm happy for them. So I like that pick a lot, and I went Cade because he's Cade. And I don't think I need to give you a huge argument for that. He is Cade. He's playing on a poo-poo team that's going to need him. And I feel like eventually is probably going to trade Jeremy Grant. I just feel like that's inevitable. And once they do that, it'll open up even more opportunities for Cade. He's just the guy. Like, he's coming in immediately as the guy. And, you know, not a lot of rookies get the opportunity to do that. And I feel like when they do, they usually end up becoming Rookie of the Year. Especially a guy who is as talented immediately as Cade is. I do like the Giddey pick, though. I have no qualms there. I'm totally with you on that. I just think that Cade has the name recognition. And like I said, he's playing on a team in the Pistons that has kind of some interest around them because they're still in one of the larger markets. Detroit sports, they are very passionate fans over there. And he's Cade, man. I mean, what more can you say? We saw what the dude did in college. He's Cade. Okay, so those are some of the awards. I didn't put Coach of the Year in here. I guess I could just ask you off the top of your head. It's not really one that I think about a whole lot. But is there anyone off the top of your head, Chip, that screams Coach of the Year to you?
Nate McMillan.
He should have won it last year.
He had a good case. I think he's getting his return this year. I think Billy's got a good chance too. I mean, I think like Billy, Quinn Snyder. I think for me, Nate McMillan, I think the Hawks are going to be really, really good. I think they have the potential to win total just because they're so deep in the regular season. And I mean, we've seen it with that exact franchise before where, you know, they won 60 games with not really maybe the best top end talent. And I think when you look at the regular season, you look at depth and you look at Kyrie being out, there's a very good chance I think that the Hawks could be up there and wins with the Nets and the Bucks. And if that happens, I think Nate McMillan's going to have a really hard case to beat.
Yeah. That's a great point. Yeah, if they do end up being up there, I don't see why not. And Billy, that was another question actually that we talked about on the Bulls on Tap Pod. Was Billy Donovan his potential to win Coach of the Year? You know, probably have to be a top 3, top 4 seed. What I would need to see, you know, from me to think of him as a Coach of the Year, is just a dominant regular season performance from the Bulls. You know, I don't expect them to be the top seed necessarily, but as long as they are like showing that they belong, you know, winning games handedly against good teams, not just skirting by, I think you can make the argument for Billy Donovan. But, you know, there's so many talented coaches in the NBA, so many very well-deserving coaches who I feel like will be in the conversation. So that brings us now to who we think will win these conferences. And we'll start over in the West. Chip, who do you have winning the Western Conference?
I have Arturas Karnisovas, former team, the Denver Nuggets, winning the Western Conference.
Yeah.
I think maybe their playoff seeding isn't the highest because of the Jamal Murray injury, but he's going to be back by playoff time. He's going to have enough time in the regular season to get himself back in form.
Yeah.
And I think that team is going to have some unstoppable lineups. And I think they're just maybe the most fun team, I think, in the NBA right now. I think their roster is super well built. I think they work well together. I think they've got established systems. I think they're going to be great.
Yeah. I'm with you 100%. I have the Nuggets coming out of the West too, for all the same reasons. And I think, you know, with Murray coming back from his injury, it's a long season. That team loves to play together. So I don't feel like there would be any kind of rust or any, you know, weird chemistry issues to work through. They're just they're talented as all hell. They're coached so well. They have so much chemistry. They've been together for a while now. So it feels like a team that's really ready to take that next step. And I think, you look at what Arturas is building here in Chicago, and you can see what they've built there in Denver and kind of what the vision is.
Absolutely. I also think for Denver, one thing that's pretty big and is going kind of under the radar is PJ Dozier is like a phenomenal defender. And I think he always kind of had a lot of good things about his offensive game. And it seems like the shot's really starting to finally come around, really come around. And I think if that guy can, shoot at the league average for you, that just makes like defense a whole lot easier when you've got Will Barton and PJ Dozier and Jeff Green. And not necessarily defensively, but Nashawn Bones Highland, their rookie, Busy Bones.
Yeah.
That kid is a special scorer. Yeah. And I mean, they're kind of adverse to playing rookies usually, but it seems like he's going to force his way into the rotation. I mean, he's just such an incredible offensive spark plug.
Yeah, I like Bones a lot. Another dude that's like Michael Porter Jr., like the Nuggets, what they were able to do in the draft. They take chances on guys, and it tends to pan out. And that is kind of the vision that I feel like Arturas Karnisovas operates under, of taking calculated risks, but being aggressive when there's a guy that you want. So love the Nuggets. I love what they've done. And it doesn't hurt to bring back the reigning MVP either. So over in the East, I took a bit of a safe pick. I think you did too, so it's not that big of a deal. I'm not going to feel bad about it. I went Nets over in the East. Obviously, the homer in me wants to say the Bulls. Realistically, I'm not going to do that. I think the Nets at some point will end up figuring it out. I think it would be absolutely outrageous if Kyrie Irving doesn't play basketball this season. I know it's very possible, but I don't know, man. Maybe in my naive, innocent head, I want to believe that just couldn't happen. The situation will get resolved. He'll get vaccinated, and we'll move on with our lives. Who knows? But in my head, if they do end up coming to form the way that we know the Nets can, there's just no team better in terms of talent, top to bottom. You really just cannot do better than their big three. And I'd even expanded to the big four. Blake Griffin's a very good player still. Overall, that team is just insane. And I think they still have some young talent too. So Nets for me. Chip, where'd you go?
I went for the other safe pick, the reigning champion Milwaukee Bucks. I have making it through. I think the Bucks had quietly a really good offseason. I think specifically the trade that brought them Grayson Allen is super big. I think Grayson's a really, really good player. I mean, maybe you don't necessarily agree with his antics at his previous level of basketball playing. But I mean, hey, we've seen Patrick Beverley take out Russell Westbrook. I'm just kidding. Okay. I think for me with the Bucks, I think maybe, losing PJ Tucker is kind of tough, especially in regards to the playoffs. But I still think, Giannis is someone who's, hungry and improving. And I think Chris Middleton in the playoffs was really good, but quietly in the regular season had a little bit of a down year. I think they have a system and they know how to execute it. Now that they're kind of big three of Drew, Chris, and Giannis are all kind of together, and they've had a year together in this system, and they're going to come back next year. And I think kind of the confidence of like, can we do this is kind of gone. I feel like there was an air kind of around the team of like, are we actually good enough? And now that's kind of just gone because you've won the title. And I think that means a lot to them. And I think, they're going to execute their system with confidence. And I think, like for like, they're one of the most talented teams out there. I think Jordan Noir's in potential to take a big step up. I think one thing that was massive for them in the playoffs is that Dante DiVincenzo was hurt. Right. So I think, when you come to the playoffs, you're adding, Grayson Allen. I think Jordan Noir maybe cracks the rotation and does really well for them. Dante DiVincenzo being healthy. All of a sudden, their guard depth, you're not getting Jeff Teague minutes in the playoffs. You're right. Getting Dante DiVincenzo, Grayson Allen, Jordan Noir, and I think that's a massive upgrade.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are all great points. Grayson Allen is a very underrated acquisition over the offseason. And I think, championship teams have dudes like him. That is, like, you remember, I was a huge hater of a guy like Matthew Dellavedova back in the day. And I see some of the same, like, people say they're dirty, but, they play really gritty. You need a guy like that. I feel like Alex Caruso could be that guy for us, maybe not on the dirty side of things. I think he plays very gritty with a lot of hustle. I think winning teams, winning teams need that kind of player. The tone setter, as we might call them.
That's true.
Yeah.
The Bucks had an interview, actually. Sorry to cut you off on this one. I thought was really interesting where, they brought Grayson Allen and the reporters were asking and they're saying maybe Pat Connaughton's not the most athletic guy in the Bucks anymore. Now they have Grayson Allen.
Yeah.
So I think that's a big thing when you bring in an athlete. I feel like the Bucks, they don't really have any standout athletes. But you bring in a guy like Grayson Allen, he's kind of sneaky athletic, maybe
Yeah.
real gym rat.
Real gym rat. Yeah. Real hard hat lunch pail, first in, last out.
DiVincenzo, Pat Connaughton, Grayson Allen, some athletic trio you can't stop.
Yeah, the Bucks are building an athletic juggernaut. Looking at the finals, yeah, okay, so I'll jump into mine real quick because I'm still going Nets here. I have the Nets winning the finals over the Nuggets. My thought process behind that, once again, just the most talented top to bottom team. I think if they put it together, it's scary. It keeps me up at night sometimes. I'm not going to lie. The idea of the Nets actually figuring it out and being healthy is kind of a terrifying thought. We've all kind of skirted by for 2 seasons now. KD was hurt, and then last season they had a bunch of different injuries. So we've all kind of skirted by for 2 years now with the Nets not putting it together. It feels like it might finally be time that they put it together. I also think, kind of to your point earlier about James Harden winning MVP too, I feel like that will be his role, will make them better, especially if it's more well defined. And there's also the thing that I said earlier of sometimes it is just your time. And I feel like James Harden, it is almost his time now to either win a ring or, start having the ring chaser conversation where he's kind of taking, a pay cut to go to other teams to try to find a winning team. Right now, it is his time to win the finals as the guy. And this feels like the window. So I'm going Nets. Who do you got?
Well, I have the Milwaukee Bucks and the Denver Nuggets in the finals, so it'd probably be bad if I picked a team that wasn't one of those two. If I just throw out the Cavs or something.
Oh no! I mean, hey man, who knows? Yeah.
So I have the Denver Nuggets. Yeah. I think this year it's gonna be their year. I think Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. I think Jamal Murray is maybe one of the more underrated guys in the league. Honestly, I mean, the skill set he provides. I'm not sure that there's anyone else in the NBA who really does what Jamal does. I think. One thing that's gone really under the radar, especially last year, it started to pick up. Jamal Murray defensively has become very, very, very good as a point of attack defender, and I think that's really big for them. And I think when you're running Jokic, who plays a similar defensive style to a guy like Nikola Vucevic, it becomes more important who your guy at the point of the attack is, and if they can set the big man up to succeed. And I think Jamal can do that. I mean, Michael Porter Jr. obviously is an undeniable talent to scoring. Nikola Jokic is pretty good at basketball as well, but I think people maybe already know that and don't need me to tell them that. But I think, there's a lot of guys that depth-wise are going to be getting healthy. And I just think Jamal Murray, I think Aaron Gordon, he shot really poorly in the playoffs than last year. I think with the increased spacing and the extra year in the system, that fixes. And I would be pretty surprised if they didn't make a move at the deadline to try to get someone else in to help them do well. And I think there's a lot of good depth with guys like Jeff Green, PJ Dozier, Monte Morris.
Right. Yeah, the Nuggets have never been afraid to make deadline moves. So that's a great point. I do think the Aaron Gordon contract was a little interesting. Obviously not going to change their finals chances this season, but I do think that that's an interesting thing to watch going forward. But yeah, man, I'm with you. The Nuggets, like I said, you're bringing back the MVP of the league. On top of all the other moves that you guys have made, you're bringing back Jamal Murray from his injury. Michael Porter Jr. is only getting better. That is a scary, scary team. And Arturas kind of show us, baby. I mean, what can you say? It's the vision. It's the long-term vision. It's the short-term vision mixed with the long-term vision. And that's kind of the hope here in Chicago. Even if the Bulls aren't winning the finals this season necessarily, the vision is in place. We have young guys like Patrick Williams, Iota Sumu. I mean, I'd even throw Marko Simonovic in there a little bit, of guys who will be developed over the next few seasons and be a part of the next generation of the Bulls core, however many years in the future as we're looking forward to. That's the season. Man, we got through all the awards. We got through all of the champs and winners and losers. Was there anything else on your mind that you wanted to bring up? Any stray thoughts that you wanted to throw out there? Maybe Bulls related, maybe not.
I don't know if you want to open that can of worms, Ross. We don't have that much time.
Okay, fair enough. If you have one thing, I can give you one thing. If there's something that is just burning that you want to talk about.
Oh, I can give you one thing that's been bothering me the last few days.
Yeah.
I'm going to be honest. I get it. It's New York and Chicago. They don't like each other. if you're not on Twitter, Bulls fans and Knicks fans maybe not getting along super well the last couple of days. It upsets me deeply because I think both teams are so good.
Yeah.
I think both teams made really good moves and improved a lot. And I think both teams are kind of the fan bases are kind of trying to validate themselves by bringing the other one down.
Yeah.
I think we need to unify against like the Celtics and the Sixers. They're the real frauds.
I agree. I think
we're the good teams.
I think Celtics Twitter is like the most toxic. And the Sixers fans just want to like trade Ben Simmons for Zach LaVine, and that's just silly. But as far as like toxicity goes on Twitter, dude, Celtics fans take it to a different level sometimes. And yeah, I would rather be in solidarity with Knicks fans because like they can say some things that are outrageous sometimes, but these aren't guys who are doxing you or threatening your life. Like Celtics fans are crazy sometimes. So I'm with you on that. And I also think like with the Knicks and Bulls rivalry, at least recently, it's like Knicks fans are like, well, you guys sucked last season. Well, you guys sucked 2 seasons. Like, we're not that different, you and I. We're actually very similar teams in recent memory. So there's really not a whole lot to brag about. If you want to brag about Jordan years, I mean, I don't do it. I don't brag about Jordan years because I was a kid. I was a baby. I was born in '96. There's no point. You know, I brag with Knicks fans about like the D Rose years a little bit, but like even then it's so long ago. Like let's move forward. Let's move on. Let's move into the new era of Bulls basketball with a positive mindset. And if we beat the Knicks along the way, that's just a little bit of bragging rights. We could brag after, but let's save the chirping until we've actually done something, which hopefully is this season. It'd be nice. Chip, thank you so much for joining me. If you guys don't remember, at MVPaw on Twitter, Bulls Dynasty, you do great work, great writing. I really appreciate you joining me today. And we'll see what ends up happening this season, man. Bulls Pistons Wednesday night, regular season tips off. We will have preview and post-game coverage here on Arturas Fan Club. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, all the different platforms. We're on all of them. Once again, Chip, thank you for being our guest today, and go Bulls.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. Go Bulls.
Go Bulls.